Hello, it's Miss Simpson again. World History, April, week 3. We're looking at the events leading up to World War II. A lot of events, a lot of stuff. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, World War II. The the casualties of the war somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 million people. Um, but we have to go back to World War One a little bit to get to World War Two, because the reason why World War Two even happened was because of World War One, because of the anger the Germans had about the Treaty of Versailles and all of the things that were put in place to make them pay back and make whole the other countries that were harmed in World War One. Um, the the economy in the world after World War One actually was really good for a little while. You had the Roaring Twenties, and the Roaring Twenties were roaring because everybody was living large. You had people being very materialistic, buying up everything, had appliances, partying, chilling, hanging loose, shopping, buying. And that's kind of what led to the Great Depression, which led to World War II. Because the Great Depression wasn't just in the United States, the Depression happened all over the world. But let's go back. So, in the end of World War One, you had communism rise. You had Lenin bring communism to Russia, and communism is a good concept in theory, in the sense that the idea is that everyone is taken care of, that the state owns everything and then gives it out to everybody equally. The problem with communism that a lot of people don't realize is that people are naturally competitive beings. And when you have naturally competitive beings and you tell them you're all going to get the same thing, people aren't good with that. So whenever you have a communist regime, it becomes a regime, meaning it becomes a situation where force has to be exerted in order for communism to happen. That's the case in North Korea currently in 2020. That's the case in China. And that's the case in Cuba. Uh, Three prominent communist countries still in 2020. At this time, back in this time period, it was a matter of course that force was used to exert communism on the people of Russia. Um, and because of the nature of communism to the rest of the world, it became this ugly, horrible thing. And the concept isn't horrible and ugly, but how it is acted out is the ugly part. Because people get killed and people get um, punished and so forth just for being human, and it is human to be competitive. So that's one of the things that happened after World War One that ultimately was one of the consequences that led to World War Two. Okay. Next, in the world, you had again prosperity. You had let's take a second to look at Black Americans. You had Black Americans go away to war in World War One, see that they were treated pretty well over in Europe, and then came back to the United States, and they would be lynched in their uniforms. That created a lot of anger because a lot of them went to Europe, were treated as equals by Europeans, and then came back to America and were told, okay, get in the back of the train, go sit up there, don't do this, do that. And it created a lot of hostility, and people started to write about it and to express themselves. And that's how you had the Harlem Renaissance. So that also stemmed from World War One. Seeing what things could be made black people say, hey, I want that. We deserve that here. We went and fought for the freedom of other people. We're not free here. That's a problem. And people started writing about that. You had Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Countee Cullen, and so on and so forth. So again, another result from World War One. You had The Great Gatsby, the book. which of course we've seen as a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. You had the flappers. You had women out because they had been in factories. They had gotten a taste of independence. They were like, we like this. We like being independent. We like making our own money. We like being career women. So you had that start in this time period. One of the problems with the time period is because people were spending so much, people acted like it would always be that way. So people overproduce the appliances and all the things and the clothes, and people overproduce food and everything too. So when you have overproduction, this is economics now, we're touching economics. When you have overproduction, when you have a surplus, that means you have to lower your prices. That's supply and demand. You have more supply than you have demand. That means your prices have to come down. Prices come down, then the people who are selling the product or selling the food, now they don't get as much for it as they were. Now they owe money. Now they have to get loans, or now they have to cut back. So that was one of the problems. Additionally, people were purchasing stock. The stock market became this major thing. And the stock market is very simple. Buying stocks is simply purchasing a share of ownership in a company. What people were doing in the 1920s was purchasing that share with borrowed money. So the bank would loan them money. It's called on the margin. That means you're borrowing it to buy stock. And then when the stock market crashed, the banks were like, okay, run me my money. I need my money. And people were like, how do I have money? I don't have money. The stock isn't worth anything. I was going to make money. Now you telling me I owe money. I don't have it. And then people were like, hey, wait a minute. That bank has my whole life savings. I'm going to run to the bank and go get my money. So people had a run on the banks, lined up. Okay, I need my life savings back now. Well, everybody tried to pull their money out. The banks closed. People lost their life savings. People always say, oh, put it in the bank. You have people from this era who literally wouldn't use a bank anymore, even after banking put in place insurance. FDIC, that's insurance. That means that up to a certain amount of money, your account is insured no matter what. But that was done after this time period. Another thing a lot of people don't realize about banks is that banks take your money and then they loan it out to other people, but they also take the money and they play the stock market with it. That's why whenever you have a savings account, they have a minimum balance you can have, because they need that money in there so they can take it out and do stuff with it. That's not because they're trying to keep you responsible. That money's not even literally there. So that being the case, that was one of the things that happened. You had the banks fail. So you had the economy fall apart, the stock market fall apart, the banks fail. People were calling in mortgages, calling in everything. So after all this was said and done, you had 25% unemployment. That's a lot. That's 1 in every 4 people did not have a job. You had bread lines, you had this, you had that. You had people living in the back of a buggy. Then you had the Dust Bowl in the Midwest. You had a drought that was so strong with the Dust Bowl that the dust could be seen in like New York City from like Oklahoma. And that's a long distance. So that's a lot. But that's in the United States. This depression was happening all over the world too. Because in Germany, they were suffering there too. And along comes Hitler and says, hey, I can solve your problems, but it's the Jewish people's fault, so we got to get them. And it's the communists' fault, and it's the gypsies' fault, and it's homosexuals' fault. And Hitler he was an idiot, but he was charismatic. Does that sound familiar? So he talked this group of people into annihilating or trying to annihilate all these different people to the tune of like 11 million people. But he did it because he was put in place in a desperate time period. You had a time period when he was like, I got it. I can solve the problems. You just got to follow me. And you all are going to read an article about Hitler that talks about how he really was. And I really want y'all to notice some characteristics about him that you might be seeing now in 2020 in the United States. That's all I'm going to say. But I want you to make those connections because it's something there to that. So you had the banks fail, you had 25%, and then you had the Great Depression that was around the world. and it affected people in Russia. They were hungry. So when Stalin came along and said, hey, we're going to keep going with this communist agenda, and if you don't like it, I'm going to kill you. He killed, what, 25 million people in the course of his tyranny. He killed more people than Hitler. But people don't notice that because he wasn't killing them for racial reasons or for a difference or a demographic. But it was just as evil, if not more. I mean, rating evil, but it's a lot of people. He killed, that's a lot of people. So then you had him, and you had Mussolini in Italy, and you had Francisco Franco in Spain. So you had all of these dictators rising up because of the depression that was happening in Europe, in addition to what happened in the United States. So this is a worldwide thing that was happening. Whenever we talk about the Great Depression in the United States, we only think about it within our borders. But it was happening in other places too, which led to all the conflict, which led to World War II. You also had conflict and economic problems in Asia. And you had Japan over there practicing their imperialism, invading China, and so on and so forth. So you had all of this happening all around the world, in addition to all these economic problems and surplus problems and all of that. So what you all are going to be doing is, first, there's a video that you're going to watch, a crash course video that gives you the visual of all of this. Not as much the economics and not as much, of course, the Black history, but it gives you the good picture of Europe. And then you're going to look at an article that a gentleman wrote, a book about Hitler and world history. And he talks about Hitler, and it's an article from a magazine that was published last year. So I'm going to have you look at that and make some comparisons, and that will be your assignment for this week. So you'll have the video, you're going to take some notes, some guided notes, and then you're going to read the article and complete an online worksheet for that. Okay? So I will see you in our chat, and thank you for watching.